For over 600 years, two worlds clashed in an endless struggle. On one side, the rising power of the Ottoman Empire, fearless sultans, ruthless janissaries, and unstoppable ambition. On the other side, the kingdoms of Christian Europe, fighting to defend their lands, their faith, and their survival. From the fall of Constantinople to the gates of Vienna, from the Mediterranean to the heart of the Balkans, this was not just a war of swords and cannons, it was a war of destiny. This is the story of the longest conflict in history, the Ottoman Empire versus Europe. In the late 13th century, Anatolia was a land of chaos. The once mighty Byzantine Empire was crumbling, weakened by centuries of internal strife and attacks from crusaders and invaders. Among the many Turkish tribes fighting for dominance, one leader rose to power, Osman, son of Ertuğrul. He carved out a small state on the frontier of Byzantium, a state that would one day grow into one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. The name of that leader, Osman, gave birth to a dynasty that would last for centuries, the Ottomans. What began as a tiny principality of warriors soon transformed into a relentless machine of conquest. By the mid-14th century, the Ottomans had crossed into Europe. Their armies, disciplined and fierce, swept across the Balkans, defeating princes and kings who underestimated them. The Christian world was shocked as one city after another fell. Europe had always feared invaders from the east, but now that fear had a name, the Ottomans. The turning point came in 1453. Constantinople, the capital of Byzantium, the jewel of the East, the city that had stood for more than 1,000 years, was surrounded by Ottoman armies led by a young sultan named Mehmed II. Only 21 years old, he carried the ambition of Alexander the Great and the determination of Caesar. For weeks, cannons roared as the walls trembled. Europe watched in horror as the unthinkable happened. On May 29th, the great city fell. Constantinople became Istanbul, and the Eastern Roman Empire was no more. The Christian world mourned, but the Ottoman Empire rejoiced, declaring itself the new Rome. From this moment forward, Europe and the Ottomans entered a struggle that would shape history. To the west, the fall of Constantinople was not just the loss of a city, it was the awakening of an enemy that would threaten them for centuries. To the Ottomans, it was only the beginning of their destiny. Mehmed the Conqueror turned his eyes toward Europe. Armies marched deeper into the Balkans, and the once mighty kingdoms of Serbia, Bulgaria, and Hungary trembled under the crescent flag. The wars were brutal. Villages were burned, castles besieged, and entire populations displaced. The Ottomans brought with them a new kind of military order. Their secret weapon was the Janissary Corps, an elite army of child soldiers taken from Christian families, converted to Islam, and trained to fight with absolute loyalty to the Sultan. They became the terror of Europe, feared for their discipline and ferocity. But Europe was not willing to surrender. The kings and princes called upon the Pope, declaring crusades against the Ottomans. Battles raged across the Danube and into the heart of Hungary. At Vienna in 1444, a crusading army was crushed by the Ottomans, and the King of Poland and Hungary was slain. The message was clear: this was not an enemy to be taken lightly. The 16th century brought the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. Under Suleiman the Magnificent, the empire reached its zenith. Suleiman was not only a warrior, but also a statesman, a patron of art, law, and culture, but his ambition was also endless. In 1526, he crushed the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohacs, a disaster so complete that Hungary ceased to exist as an independent kingdom. The road to Central Europe lay open. Only one city stood in his way: Vienna. In 1529, the Ottoman armies laid siege to the Austrian capital. The cannons thundered, the soldiers dug trenches, and Europe held its breath. If Vienna fell, the heart of Europe would be exposed, but fate intervened. Heavy rains, disease, and stubborn resistance forced Suleiman to withdraw. Europe rejoiced, believing it had survived a miracle. Yet the Ottomans were far from defeated. For the next century, Europe and the Ottomans fought on land and sea. The Mediterranean became a battlefield, with the powerful Ottoman navy clashing against the fleets of Venice and Spain. In 1571, at the Battle of Lepanto, the Christian alliance dealt the Ottomans a rare defeat. Thousands of ships clashed in a sea of fire and blood, and for the first time Europe saw that the Ottomans were not invincible. Still, the war raged on, relentless and merciless. The Balkans bore the brunt of the conflict. For centuries, the people of Greece, Serbia, Romania, and Bulgaria lived under Ottoman rule. Some collaborated, others resisted. Rebellions flared, often crushed with brutal efficiency. Yet the Ottoman system was not only about war. They built cities, mosques, and trade routes. Istanbul became one of the greatest cities of the world, a bridge between East and West. For the Ottomans, this was proof of their civilization's superiority. For Europe, it was a nightmare that would not end. The 17th century brought the struggle to its climax. In 1683, the Ottomans once again marched on Vienna. This time, the Sultan's Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha, led the greatest army the empire had ever assembled. The city was surrounded, its defenders desperate. Europe feared the worst. But on September 12th, an allied army led by the Polish king Jan Sobieski arrived. In one of the most decisive battles in history, the Ottomans were defeated. The siege of Vienna was broken, and Europe breathed a sigh of relief. The tide had turned. From that moment on, the Ottomans were on the defensive. Slowly but surely, Europe pushed back. The Habsburgs retook Hungary, Venice reclaimed territories, and Russia began its rise as a new enemy from the north. The empire that had once terrified Europe now found itself struggling to hold its borders. Yet the war did not end. For centuries, battles continued, small wars, great wars, endless wars. The Ottomans clashed with Russia in the Black Sea, with Austria in the Balkans, with Venice in the Mediterranean. Each war chipped away at their power. By the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire was no longer the great conqueror. It was the sick man of Europe, struggling to survive. But Europe had been forever changed. The fear of the Ottoman threat had united Christian kingdoms that once fought each other. The clash had spurred military innovation, diplomacy, and alliances. The Renaissance, the age of exploration, and the rise of European empires all unfolded against the backdrop of the Ottoman Wars. In a strange way, Europe's survival had shaped its destiny. The Ottomans would continue to fight into the 19th and early 20th centuries. But by the end of World War I, the empire was gone, carved up by the victorious powers of Europe. What had begun with Osman in 1299 ended with the Treaty of Sèvres in 1920. 600 years of war had finally come to an end. But the legacy remains. The scars of those centuries still mark the Balkans, the Middle East, and Europe itself. The Ottoman Empire versus Europe was not just a clash of armies, it was a clash of civilizations, of religions, of worlds. It was a war that shaped our present, a war that echoes even today. For 600 years, swords clashed, cannons thundered, and empires rose and fell. The story of the Ottomans and Europe is the story of history itself, brutal, relentless, and unforgettable. If you want more stories of history's greatest mysteries, battles, and turning points, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and join us on this journey into the past. This is Quest Revealers, and thanks for